Um, Welcome to Enlightenment Radio. This is a radio show with video, like the vlog things that come out in the next 400 years. So, the great philosopher Immanuel Kant once said that the Enlightenment was man leaving his self caused immaturity into an age of reason. The great man. He coined many phrases, but this was his most influential. Philosophies were a group of intellectuals, poor people, rich people, scientists, whatever you want to call them, who gathered in coffee houses and salons around France in one of the first urban movements of creating new thoughts and ideas and concepts and all of that jazz. The buzzwords of this era, before buzzwords were buzzwords, was reason, natural law, hope, and progress. It's like the beginnings of democracy thousands of years after the first democracies. All of our reasoning and natural laws and sciences came from the influential science of Newton. This wonderful man, another wonderful man. There were just so many wonderful men during this time period, and Newton was one of them. And most people were not educated enough. They didn't care enough. They didn't learn enough to read Newton. So, another wonderful, wonderful, wonderful man, Fontenelle, created this book, The Plurality of Worlds. And in this book, he explored all of the scientific thought of the era before him, all the greats, and created it into a piece of literature that is so influential that no one reads it. But at that time, it was the twilight of their time. It was beautiful and horrible and all of these wonderful feelings mixed up into a movie, a 5-piece movie out of 4 books of drivel. So, yeah. Another, again, great man, because only men were great in this time. Women didn't count at all, but that's another point. Another great man was Bale. And John Bale, he was just beautiful. And he wrote this historical and critical dictionary, which was a historical criticism on the Bible. And that's when the entire world explodes. I mean, they can't handle the fact that someone's actually criticized the Bible with some literature and scientific basis. People have done at this point in time. And they call it, wait, this name is absolutely shocking. I'm sorry for the obscenity of this name. They call it the Bible of their time, which is so ironic because it was denouncing the Bible. And you needed me to point out that irony. Furthermore, there were several great philosophers of this period. My personal favorite is Diderot. He was beyond his time. He was a man that would be present in the Tumblr of our era. And Diderot wrote like a god, like that god that wrote that Bible thing that was criticized by Bale. He was all for freedom of speech and those wonderful ideals that no one's ever fulfilled ever. And he criticized Christianity quite heavily, especially towards the end of his life, and the sexual norms of their culture. Voltaire has a famous quote, which is constantly misquoted, as I will demonstrate, which says, "I may not agree with your opinion, but I defend to the death your right to say it." Voltaire was for the freedom of speech. He wrote hundreds of essays and books, more than I could manage in my little 50 minutes, and was eventually known as the greatest philosopher of his time, which is a fabulous honor when you're compared to Locke, who actually started this entire movement with his concept of tabula rasa, the blank slate that all of human experience and society came from the environment around it rather than an innate concept. Um, Another fantastic person is On My Thumb, which is currently doing weird things like moving. You see thumbs, they're opposable. It's the greatest human accomplishment. But another great, great woman, the only great woman of this time, because very few women were allowed to be great in intellectual thoughts. But Mary Wollstonecraft, she's influential. She produced Frankenstein, or rather, she produced the Spawn who produced Frankenstein. And Wollstonecraft was the first feminist, my personal hero. She did a vindication on the rights of women and just slaughtered everyone who thought that they could oppress women just because they didn't have education. But the vindication of the rights of women sort of was rejected by every renowned school at the time period, and no one read it. It was really influential. And yeah. So those are the most influential people of this time period, and their thoughts culminated into a revolution that changed modern history in the most cliche ways that we can imagine.
Magazines directed towards women and newspapers also arose during this time period. They became very widespread in the high culture and the popular culture. Secondary schools for upper class children also arose. Other schools for the lower classes were also made, but they were separated from the high class because of people's belief that children should be able to function in their own social classes. Schools focused on Greek and Latin classics in the higher classes. New schools were also developed to offer a broader education, but women only learned about religion and domestic skills.
An 18th century established Catholic and Protestant churches were conservative institutions that held up society's hierarchical structure, privilege, class, and traditions. They kept records such as birth, death, and marriages. They were the charity for the poor and cared for orphans. They also supervised education. The Protestant Reformation had solved the problem of the relationship of the church and the state. Protestant churches now flourished. In 1700, the church still had a lot of power in Europe and continued to be wealthy. The Jesuits eventually declined in papal power by the mid-18th century. During this time, there was a cry for religious toleration by the philosophes. Joseph II of Austria, for example, called for the toleration patent of 1781. Jews were very restricted on their religious beliefs during this time, though. Now on to popular religion in the 18th century. Catholic faith was still a major part of people's lives. Protestant churches were now well controlled by the state and had a well-educated clergy. Pietism in Germany was a response to a desire for a deeper connection to God. John Wesley, who said, "I felt I did trust in Christ alone for salvation, and an assurance was given to me, and he had taken away my sins, even mine, and saved me from the law of sin and death. I felt my heart was strangely warmed." He preached to the masses and appealed to the lower class. Although religion was still important in everyday life, secularism was fastly spreading.
Well, folks, that's all we have for today. This is Cassidy Spittler signing off, and we wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We'll see you next time on Enlightenment Radio.
This is my newscaster face.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think.
It's a really pro
Well, you're not going to
newscaster
use
face.
the microphone? That's a really short video.
Alright.
Look at this
Beep.
bitch.
You know, I'm gonna start recording. Like, this shit's
Beep.
actually recording. I have to do the project, sort of thing. This is my professional post. getting real with the people inside of this
Nobody
fucking.
cares.
Secondary schools for upper class children became also a huge thing that happened.